So, Michael, just 4 questions arising out of the evidence. When adverse reactions to drugs, including blood products, occurred in Scotland, to whom would such incidences be reported, given that there were no reporting centres in Scotland?
They would go straight to the Medicines Division or the Medicines Control Agency, and now they would come to the MHRA.
And then, do you recall the CSM or the subcommittees with which you were involved ever providing any advice directly to the Scottish office during your time at the CSM?
No, the licensing authority was the Secretaries of State for Health in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So Scotland was covered in that way, and still is too.
The third question, was there, to your knowledge, any formal arrangement between the CSM and the United Kingdom Haemophilia Centre Directors Organisation, UKHCDO, for UKHCDO to monitor serious adverse reactions to blood products in place of the CSM?
No. And I don't recall having any direct contact with the haemophilia centres.
So haemophilia clinicians should have, whatever else they might have done in terms of reporting matters to within UKHCDO, they should have reported using the yellow form system adverse reactions directly to the Medicines Division.
Yes.
Last question relates to the current system for monitoring adverse health events. Is the yellow card system still in operation, to your knowledge, or was it when you were at the MHRA?
Oh yes, it's still very active, yes. And when I left the MHRA, we were getting about 30,000 yellow cards a year. Yes, it's still in operation, and it's still an important way of identifying new adverse reactions. And
although no doubt it probably involves a great deal more technology than the previous system you described, does it effectively operate in the same way?
What, the yellow card scheme? Yeah, yes. Well, yes, except nowadays, not only doctors and pharmacists and dentists are asked to report, but also patients and their families.
And then, leaving aside the yellow card system, did the MHRA have, during the time you were there, have any other particular systems or processes for monitoring adverse health events suffered by patients using a licensed product?
Well, if it was concerned about a particular product, then it might ask the manufacturer to provide more information. But the MHRA still continues to rely heavily on the yellow card scheme.
Was it your impression that the MHRA was more proactive in terms of perhaps undertaking its own inquiries and investigations than the CSM and the licensing authority previously?
I'm not sure I could say that. Because, of course, when I was at the MHRA, and still in some respects, we were all wrapped up with the European system. And so all the yellow cards we had all got sent copies to the EMA.
So those are the additional questions I'm proposing to ask. I don't think Ms. Wolfe has any. No. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. There are 3 areas, really. The first arises out of a throwaway remark that you made during the course of your evidence when you were talking about Lord David Owen.
Yes.
And you said what was fascinating was that his idea or commitment to self-sufficiency.
Yes.
What fascinated you in particular? Why fascinated?
Well, because this was in the mid-1970s when he was a relatively junior minister in the health department. And at that stage, we didn't know about the infections and so on. But, you know, he was absolutely right. We should have tried to become self-sufficient. And I was sort of intrigued by the fact that he tried to do it, but failed. I'm not quite sure why he failed, but he couldn't persuade his colleagues to, I don't know, produce the necessary resources. I don't know.
Thank you.
Although I know him moderately well because I was a founder member of the SDP with him and got to know him very well then. And occasionally I bump into him, but you know, and we recognise each other. I haven't seen him since I read what he'd said, and I'd love to know why he thought that. You know, why in the mid-1970s was he pressing for us to become self-sufficient?
Well, he's given us an explanation which is available. I think the best I can say is it's in transcript form, rather than my trying to put his own views in my words. And in due course, we'll let you know through the inquiry where you can find that, and so you can have a look and see what he had to say, because it plainly would matter of some interest to you. The second is if I can just take you to two parts of your witness statement and ask you a little bit about those. The first is really about the yellow card scheme. The witness statement, WITN 6406001, at page 42, if you please, very bottom of the page. And you were asked by counsel some of the difficulties of the yellow card scheme, why it didn't pick up everything, if you like, what its weaknesses might be. And here at 13.2, paragraph 13.2, you summarise it under 5 headings. The shortcomings, you say, are they rely on doctors reporting suspected rather than proven adverse reactions.
Yes.
B, they're inherently more likely to detect adverse reactions which occur soon after the start of treatment.
Yes.
C, some reactions, such as those with a long latency, may remain unrecognised. D, only a small proportion of even serious adverse drug reactions were reported to the CSM.
Yes.
And E, reporting rates tend to decline with time after a product has been marketed. The familiarity effect, I think you're talking about there. Is there a further one? What I would like some help with is how it was that the adverse effect was disentangled from the effects of other drugs or other treatments. What I have in mind is that many patients who had drugs, first of all, had them for medical conditions, which may have involved them taking other products as well.
Yes.
Secondly, even if they didn't, they may have had, particularly in cases where there was a long latency period, they may have had different drugs at different times, or drugs of the same class, but with slightly different pharmacological properties.
Yes.
How did you disentangle the effects of one in order to get a yellow card report? How would you expect a GP to do that in the first place, and how would you analyse it at the centre?
I understand the difficulty. It's difficult for all of us. Even people like me who are supposed to know a bit about clinical pharmacology. So it would be difficult, and I do understand that. But as I keep on saying, and it's suspected adverse reactions, not proven ones.
So for someone taking, let's say, a cocktail of 4 drugs, and they have a reaction, each of the 4 drugs would be listed on the suspected drug reaction list, would they?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, one drug might be most likely to be the cause, But you know, and the other drugs may be a sort of subset. But so it would be a matter of judgment, really.
And the judgment will be that of the GP in the first instance?
That it was worth reporting, yes.
Yes, I see. Yes, thank you for that. The final matter is this. It's the same statement, but page 60.
Yep.
Paragraph 16.6. And again, you mentioned this briefly in the course of your evidence, but picking it up in the second line, you give your own view, you verbally advise that notwithstanding the additional costs, we should use heat-treated factor VIII rather than expose patients to the risks associated with non-heated material. Some of my colleagues in the medicines division stated that since some patients had already been infected, the heat-treated material should only be offered to patients uninfected with hepatitis B or HIV. And you then say this: the argument was curtailed by a statement from the District General Manager, Chris Spry, that he was not prepared for any patient in his area to be given material known to be contaminated, irrespective as to whether they'd been infected or not. You would therefore authorise the additional costs. You mentioned Mr. Spry and his views 3 times, I think, in your witness statement, and I have a sense that you approve of his approach. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. He was a manager. He wasn't a medic, a doctor. He was a manager, but he was incredibly sensible and wise. And I, as I said, and as I still remember him saying, I'm not going to have any patient in my area given material known to be contaminated.
And you approved of it then, and you approve of that view now, do you?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And this is despite having spent the years from 1999 on until the early, the second decade of this millennium, as the founding chair of NICE, which has something of a reputation of turning down treatments on cost grounds.
Yes, it does.
But despite that, you would maintain exactly the same attitude today.
Oh, yes, I would. Yes.
Yes.
I mean, the business about cost effectiveness is complicated, and NICE has all sorts of arrangements whereby it can override the numerical assessment of cost effectiveness. So it's not a rigid approach it takes. It takes a pragmatic approach to looking at cost effectiveness.
Yes, and that would result in exactly the same approach then today as it would then, in your view, should have done.
It should have done, yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, those are all the questions that I have to ask. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Michael, was there anything that you wanted to add?
Not really. Well, 2 things, really. I'd like to thank you and to Brian for allowing me to do this virtually. There's no way, actually, I could have struggled down to London. So, with my gammy leg. And secondly, once again, to say how much I feel for the patients and their families who were subjected to this infected blood. And I look forward to seeing what Sir Brian says in his eventual report.
Well, can I, for my part, thank you for being prepared to give us the evidence. I'm sure that your gammy leg may have given you some trouble despite, but thank you for giving us your time, and in particular for giving evidence which has been so straightforward, and you've answered questions exactly to the point, which is particularly helpful to us, and given us an insight which we could not otherwise have had into the way in which the Committee on the Safety of Medicines operated, in the current phrase, back in the day. So I'd just like to thank you for that. It's been quite illuminating. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's it for today, sir. And then tomorrow we resume with the evidence of Charles Lister.
Yes, Charles Lister, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock.
Thank you, sir.